When was the last time you felt yourself acting compulsively? Doing something that you didn't particularly want to do, but that you felt that you had no choice but to do it. It might be procrastinating, endless phone scrolling, overeating, loading up certain websites, anything that you might describe as a coping mechanism. Well, what we're going to do in this video is explain where these patterns and habits come from and what they're trying to protect us against, and also what they're trying to pull us towards in a more positive light. I want to simplify and summarize the first chapter of this absolutely incredible book to help make this clearer, and also to make the rest of the book more accessible if you do decide to read it for yourself. This book has given me so much structure and mapping to help me understand what I do and why I do it, so I really highly recommend it. And I've recommended this before on my channel as well. Just so you know, this video will be more of a diagrammatic explanation of the issue, and I'll also go over some other books as well that can be used as solutions to this problem, but there's plenty more of other videos on this channel that will serve as solutions if that's what you're looking for. Okay, so let's get started. Firstly, the chapter begins by asking you to think about your own compulsions, addictions, behaviours, or attitudes that you find yourself involved with. These are the ones that you often resort to, but against your will or best intentions. It could be things like food addiction, being drawn towards certain adult sites, becoming obsessed with specific people, and so on. As you can probably imagine, I have to be quite careful with the words that I'm choosing here, but you can likely get the idea when I say coping mechanisms and compulsions. This is an important step, but it's much more important to think about what happens if you don't go down this pathway. So when you feel the urge and the compulsion, but force yourself to not perform the behavior and just sit with the tension. Furman and Gieler, who are the authors of this book, compiled a list of 21 examples based on their work with other participants. But for the sake of brevity, I'll simplify this down to 6, which I've already written out on here for you. These are feelings of being lost, invisible, abandoned, powerless, unloved, paranoid, anything like this. You might feel different or choose different language, but the point is always the same. These feelings and experiences are so intense and uncomfortable that we are forced, often against our conscious will, to a behaviour to help cover it up. And that is why these behaviours can be considered to be coping mechanisms, because we're trying to cope with these intensely charged feelings. In some way, and to varying intensities, these are threats to my sense of being. They threaten my self-image of who I think I am. I don't want to consider myself to be invisible, abandoned, powerless, unloved, and the thought that this might actually be true is too much to bear. So these coping mechanisms are a solution to this threat. It's a distorted one, but it's an attempted solution. And in the book, this is going to be referred to as the threat of non-being. In everyday language, that just means the threat to who you think you are as a person. So we've started to get a bit of a diagram forming already. An uncomfortable experience gives rise to a compulsive behaviour so that we avoid thinking about the threat to our self-image, which is the threat to our non-being. So figure 1.1 on page 16 shows this really simply, but I'm going to write it out on here just to make it a bit clearer still for the sake of this video. If we reverse this explanation, the threat of non-being is too much, it makes us feel abandoned, and so we become addicted to relationships as a coping mechanism. If I just use this as one example. So notice that this isn't saying it's a good or a bad coping mechanism, simply that we've been desperately pulled towards anything that moves us away from this threat of non-being. And the compulsion helps us to feel safe in the moment, but it's typically a short-term, maladaptive and distorted type of safety that we know deep down won't last. But again, that thought is too much to bear, so we do our best to not think about it. Even though these aren't healthy habits or behaviours for us, they do offer some relief. So there are a lot of experienced positives and benefits to this coping mechanism. Page 17 and 18 in this book list 29 of these benefits. So there are some on here and there are some just over here, if you wanted to pause and have a little look over the video itself. But I'll simplify it down again here just to make it nice and clear. So some of these benefits include things like the feeling that I'm going to be okay. Satisfaction, it could be security, it could be comfort, it could be normality, it could be freedom, or the sense or feeling of being alive. And it's an interesting dynamic because these coping mechanisms have got a dual role. They help us to move away from this threat of annihilation and irrelevance, which is the threat of non-being. And they also help us to grasp something extremely positive and life-affirming, like acceptance and freedom. And this isn't coincidental, but in another video I'll explain what's called the egg diagram of the higher, middle, and lower unconscious. But I definitely don't want to bring in too much jargon into just one video. So we can add in one more layer to this diagram that we've created. Above the coping mechanism is the positive experience that it is trying to aim at. I'll be using the example from figure 1.2 in the book and include belonging just above relationship addiction for the sake of this example, if you were to follow it along in the book. So just to make this diagram nice and clear, we can read it as the threat of non-being is too much and I want to escape the feelings of abandonment that accompany this feeling, so I'll get into any relationship just so that I can avoid this feeling. And this gives me the feeling of belonging, which is a positive feeling that helps to protect from that threat of non-being. But you can see how we start to get involved in a bit of a trap here. So this is why on page 19, there's this lovely little quote which summarizes it quite nice and simply. So, however destructive this relationship is to myself or the other person, I will still remain in its thrall, pushed by the threat of abandonment and enticed by the promise of belonging. And that's where the title of this book comes in. It becomes very, very important here. Furman and Gieler argue that the threat to non-being isn't the lowest part of this diagram, but rather the primal wound itself is. The primal wound, the first wound, was caused by some trauma that we have not been able to fully deal with and integrate, and this has left a hole in our sense of self. It's a glimpse and a tear in our self-identity, which opens us up to vulnerability. So rather than being caught in these difficult feelings or focusing on the coping mechanisms, what we need to do is to treat the underlying cause and find out where our primal wounds are and making the reparations there. Anything else is going to be too superficial and won't actually heal this hidden wound. It's also a question of self-esteem as well. On page 22, there is a list of common experiences, which I'll just leave on here. There's a list of common experiences of how people feel when they explore this wounding. Just to go through a couple of these, some common experiences are things like being overpowered, humiliated, feeling powerless, feeling isolated, feeling trapped, worthless, vulnerable, a general sense of not feeling worthy to exist as a person in some fundamental way. But in other words, it's captured very nicely by this part in green here. They did not, in these moments, experience themselves as feeling persons, but as mere objects with no freedom, dignity, or human identity. In these difficult moments, they felt less than human and so vulnerable that it became too overwhelming. So no wonder we resort to coping mechanisms to deal with something like this. The thought that we are an object and not a subject is terrifying exactly because it's a threat to our self-image. It's a threat to our being. We all want and we need to belong and feel this sense of belonging. So any threat to this belonging is likely going to originate from some wounding in a relationship. It might be with an important caregiver during our development. It might be with a close friend, humiliation from a teacher in front of a class, anything that invokes these feelings that we mentioned before, which threaten our feelings of safety and make us extremely aware of our vulnerability. If you're familiar with the idea of acceptance and commitment therapy, you might start to see similarities here between something called the experiential avoidance model. I'd recommend this book, Act Made Simple, if you want to explore the idea of moving towards important values and also how you can get hooked away from them. It's referring to a similar idea to the primal wound, but it's written in very, very accessible language. And I would also recommend, while I'm here, this book by James Hollis called Creating a Life, if you're looking to find meaning and also an anchor just to pull yourself towards a better future. I've already made another video already explaining and discussing the importance of being able to hold feelings of anxiety and ambiguity and ambivalence and how this relates to mature ego structure. So I'll leave a link below because this can also be useful to help navigate a diagram like this. Likewise, this has got a lot of links with shadow work, which you might find in Jungian theory, and it's also based on Roberto Assagioli's egg diagram of the unconscious mind. So I'll leave some links to other videos if you're looking to take this idea further. I found this book challenging, but I found it extremely rewarding as well, and I intentionally took my time with it. It's really helped me to get to grips with what my coping mechanisms are, identify the underlying roots of these behaviors, and get a plan and structure in place to help grow towards the man that I know that I can become, but I just wasn't sure how I was going to get there. As always, I encourage you to read these primary sources for yourself and not to simply blindly listen to me. So please check this one out if you're looking to make a change in your life, but you just need a bit of help doing so. Just to be clear, the point of this video was to explain this diagram so that you can see how these 5 layers all relate to each other and to give you an idea about where you might like to start exploring a topic further. It could be looking at values that are important to you. It could be identifying coping mechanisms that you resort to. It could be exploring the difficult feelings that you know you feel but you don't like to admit to. It could be approaching the topic more philosophically and existentially by considering the threat of non-being in your self-image. Or it could be understanding how all of this originates from a break in empathy with a caregiver, which opens up the primal wound to begin with. But at the very least now, you've got a roadmap instead of just simply random and unrelated bits of very charged topics that you might struggle with, which might be causing you unnecessary stress. If it's something that you're interested in, I'd like to start making more videos on complementary ideas to Carl Jung and shadow work, because in general, there's so many amazing ideas out there and I just don't see them being discussed online all that much. And there's an absolute ton of shadow videos already on YouTube. So I want to try to encourage as many people as possible to explore other similar ideas. If that's interesting for you, then just let me know and I'll start making more videos. I'll still be making more videos on Carl Jung anyway. I just want to add some more variety. But this is Primal Wound by John Furman and Ann Gieler. It's an amazing book. It's extremely life-affirming. Please check it out if it interests you, and I'll see you in another lesson in the future. Just so that you're aware, as you can imagine, this was a very difficult lesson to summarize given the scope of the topic. So I hope that makes sense to you. Anyway, see you soon.